Yo, what's going on, y'all? It's Cone back here again today with another video, and today I want to go ahead and break down this upcoming Oklahoma City Thunder Dallas Mavericks second round playoff series. I would say this is probably the second most anticipated matchup in this second round, only behind Denver versus Minnesota, which was amazing in game one. Shout out to the Wolves for picking up a W there. Really hope that one goes 7 games, and if you didn't watch my prediction video, that is what I think happens. Meanwhile, for this one, I think this is also going to be a lengthy series with teams throwing punches back and forth, a lot of young star power in particular between Shai and Luka, both MVP candidates, interesting supporting cast, great co-stars. It's going to be a lot of fun. Let's talk about how these two teams got there, break down some stats, get into my keys to the matchup, and eventually, yes, I will be making a prediction about who wins this series in the end. In the first round, OKC was one of two teams to go ahead and grab a sweep, taking out the Pelicans pretty easily outside of game 1 and part of game 4. For the first about 3 quarters, it was close, but by the time the fourth quarter rolled around, the Thunder pulled away pretty handily, and they also held the Pelicans to 93 points or less the entire series, which is a massive accomplishment. Big credit to their defense. I know Zion Williamson wasn't playing, but even still, that's by far the best mark out of anybody in that first round. Also got some great performances from top guys, whether it was Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Jalen Williams, Chet Holmgren, Lu Dort playing amazing defense, and they became the youngest team to ever win a playoff series after recently becoming the youngest team to ever grab a 1 seed. On the other side of things, you have Dallas, who went ahead and conquered their demons, defeating the Los Angeles Clippers in 6 games. Despite a couple of shaky efforts, like I mentioned with the Thunder, there were a couple of games that almost didn't go Dallas's way, but eventually they do end up getting the win, and Luka didn't even play that great. Kyrie was amazing. Their defense was really good. It was very disruptive, stopping great scorers like Paul George and James Harden. They did plenty enough to go ahead and advance to face Oklahoma City, and now, like I said, we've got a battle between two of the best young guards in the world, two teams that are very solid on both sides of the ball and have a lot to prove to not just themselves, but the NBA world in general in this series. On the numbers front, over the course of the 82-game regular season, Oklahoma City was the number 3 offense, number 4 defense, and had the second best net rating, while Dallas was 8th offensively, 18th defensively, and 15th in net rating. Obviously, some of those rankings changed after their big trade deadline. Notably, they were much better defensively, but those are their marks on the season. Meanwhile, in their first round playoff series, OKC was number 10 defensively, number 1 defensively, and 2nd in net rating, while Dallas was 8th offensively, 6th defensively, and 5th in net rating. The Thunder were the better team over the course of the full 82-game season, had comparable numbers, although it's hard to gauge because obviously different opponents in the first round, and did win 3-1 in the matchups versus Dallas this season. However, you can't really take a lot away from those wins that OKC had, mainly because Game 82 was one of them where Dallas didn't play any of their starters. They're locked into place. Well, the Thunder were still trying to lock up the 1 seed, so they played everybody. Obviously, that ended up being a slaughter. Then there was another game where Luka didn't play in the second half of the season. Kyrie was there, but the Mavericks didn't end up winning that one. The one win they did get was post-trade deadline with pretty much everybody out there, and they got a massive, decisive victory over Oklahoma City, so that's a big feather in their cap. But overall, I feel like when we take a look at the full picture of the season-long matchup, there's not that much to go ahead and draw from. With that all covered, let's go ahead now and get into my biggest keys to the matchup. Probably the number one thing for me is what version of Luka Doncic are we going to get? Luka, over the course of his young career, has been one of the most dominant playoff performers we have ever seen. He's already made a Western Conference Finals run, put up some ridiculous numbers in multiple matchups against the Clippers, and on the surface, Luka's numbers look great against Los Angeles this year. 30 points, 9 rebounds, and 9.5 assists per game. However, he shot horribly, just 40% from the field and 24% from 3. Big drop-offs from his efficiency in the regular season, and averaged about 4 turnovers per game. The Mavs were able to survive against LA without Kawhi in that scenario, but OKC is much more equipped to make them pay with those turnovers, and especially if Luka's not playing his best, this Thunder team isn't going to mess around. It's also not going to get easier for Luka when he's facing great defenders like Lu Dort, who had Brandon Ingram hardly even contributing out there. And Luka's much better than Brandon Ingram, but he's still a very tough guy to go up against on every single possession probably. Jalen Williams as well. His length makes things difficult. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander has developed into a really high-level defender, especially playing off-ball. You throw any lazy passes, Shai will be there. Chet down low has been one of the best rim protectors in the league this season. Overall, this is one of the best defenses in the entire world. It's not getting any easier for Luka. As great as some of the defenders are in the Clippers, as a team, the Thunder are miles ahead of them. Yet, the Mavericks need Luka to be a lot better now. The good news for the Mavericks is that Luka is one of those generational talents where there are a lot of times where you can have some of the best defenders in the world on him, play perfect defense other than blocking the shot, and it just doesn't matter whether he's hitting his step back shots, he's getting into the lane with a spin move, finishing through contact. Luka is just one of those guys historically. So even though, again, he's going to be facing ridiculous defenders left and right, if he goes out there and has a monster series, I'm not going to be surprised because that's what Luka typically does. And also, there were a number of times against the Clippers where shots that he usually hits were just not falling. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see some regression to his usual percentages, specifically from three, in this series. One thing I do want to keep an eye on, though, in that regard is Luka is very clearly hobbled a little bit, or at least he was last time we saw him against the Los Angeles Clippers. He's been dealing with a knee injury. His mobility wasn't great. He wasn't attacking downhill the way that he typically does. If Luka is not 100%, that hurts the Mavericks a lot. They need him at his best, and especially when you're going up against, again, defenders like Lu Dort and Shai and J-Dub and Chet Holmgren down low, you need to be the best version of yourself for the Mavericks to have the best chance at winning this series. Hopefully that wear and tear cleared up a little bit between the end of round 1 and beginning of round 2, but for the moment, we'll just have to keep an eye on it. The good news for the Mavericks is they still have Kyrie Irving. Even if Luka isn't at his best, they can find ways to win games or at least remain competitive because Kyrie is that good. That's what happened a lot of time against the Clippers, where even if Luka wasn't shooting great, Kyrie came in and just annihilated them. The Thunder are really going to have to put great defenders on Kyrie, constantly keep the pressure on both guys in this backcourt, because if either one of them catches fire, things can really spiral out of control. On the other side, the Mavericks are going to have their hands full with the Thunder's very potent offense. Again, we're one of the best in the league this season. Although it wasn't perfect against the Pelicans in the first round, but that is a pretty good defensive team. The Mavericks, though, do also bring a great defensive squad of their own. They finished the regular season with the best defense over the last 15 games of the year and made things really tough again on great scorers like PG and Harden. They've got a lot of length and physicality to throw at the Thunder, and guys like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who didn't have the best series against the Pelicans. I guess you could say 27, 6, and 5 on 48% shooting. It's still really good, similar to how Luka's bad series was 30 points, 9 rebounds, and 9.5 assists. These two guys are some of the best in the world, but you've got to slow down Shai if you're the Mavericks. If you want any hope of winning this, you can't let him get going. Now, the Pelicans did a pretty good job against him, but they also had Herb Jones, who's one of the best individual defenders in the world, and I can say after watching Shai a ton, he's one of the best players in the entire NBA at guarding Shai in particular. So they've got to find someone that can slow him down. I assume they'll throw Derrick Jones Jr. at him, who does have that length and athleticism, but he's definitely not the level of defender that Herb Jones is. So guys are going to have to help, and they're also going to have to keep an eye on Jalen Williams, who is a big problem. 21, 7, and 5 on 53% shooting from the field and 39% from deep in that series against the Pelicans as the second option. You can't let him get going because even if Shai isn't doing crazy things, he's another guy that can go out there and drop 30 on any given night. They've especially got to worry about him at the beginning of those final 12 minutes because Shai goes ahead and rests for the start of the fourth quarter, and teams very often think, okay, this is the moment where we can build up a bit of a lead, but then J-Dub gets into those modes where he loves to go ahead and relentlessly attack. He was getting way more touches in that series against the Pelicans. If you let him start to build up momentum at the beginning of the fourth quarter, you're not only going to not erase the lead the Thunder might have going into the final period, OKC might build on it and then bring Shai off the bench. You have to slow him down at the beginning of those fourth quarters. You can't let them extend the lead at that point because if you do, it's going to get really difficult down the stretch against one of the best clutch teams in the NBA. Chet is also a problem. Against New Orleans, dropped 15, 9, and 2, shooting 47% from the field. Despite his three ball not being the best, he shot pretty poorly from the outside. So the Mavericks bigs are going to have to stick with him on the perimeter, which might be a little bit of a concern as well because Maxi Kleber is one of their most mobile bigs out there, and he is injured. He got hurt in the last game against the Clippers, isn't expected to play in the series. So now you're going to have guys like Derek Lively and Daniel Gafford out there on him, and Chet has shown an ability to blow by slower-footed bigs on the perimeter if they play up too much. So that's something also to keep a bit of an eye on, and I do think the Maxi Kleber loss is one that is bigger than people are giving it credit for. Overall, I do think the Mavericks have the personnel to give the Thunder some issues. We'll see what Jason Kidd cooks up in terms of a defensive scheme, but it's going to have to be perfectly executed against what is one of the most potent offenses in the league. A big part of that offense is the shooting, which brings me to another key point. Who wins the shooting battle between these two teams? Both squads really love to let their stars cook and will very often just have their guys try to get downhill and kick out to shooters, which can be a great recipe for success. The Thunder torched the Pelicans from the outside and were the best three-point shooting team through round 1 in addition to being the best three-point shooting team in the regular season. In that first series, Lu Dort shot 52%, Giddey shot 50%. If he's hitting his threes, it's a whole other problem. Wouldn't be surprised if he had some big regression in this series. I don't think that's going to keep up. But while those guys were shooting the lights out, you had other players like Isaiah Joe, who shot just 36%, Aaron Wiggins shot just 33%, Chet shot just 30% from the outside, Cason Wallace just 29%. These are all guys that were very high-level shooters in the regular season. So if those guys bounce back a little bit in the series, that's a major concern. The Mavericks have to keep that pressure on the perimeter, make sure they're only getting contested looks, keep them off rhythm, and stop Shai from getting downhill and kicking out to those guys to set them up and give them really good looks. It's a lot to go ahead and handle, but again, the Mavericks do have pretty good defensive personnel to try and slow this thing down. They've also got to decide what strategy are they going to use with Josh Giddey, because in that one regular season matchup where the Mavericks got the blowout win that I talked about earlier, their strategy was to just leave Josh Giddey open, just let someone roam on him, whether it was one of the bigs or a wing, just leave him open, let him do whatever he wants, and we'll worry about the rest of the offense. And it worked because Giddey was not hitting his shots. He wasn't being very decisive. That could be a recipe for success again. Although since that matchup, Giddey's been a lot better. His shooting percentage has come up. Again, I don't think he shoots 50% in another series, but if he's hitting his threes and he's making the right plays off of those wide open looks, things could become kind of scary for the Mavericks. So they've got to see if that works. I wouldn't be surprised if they try it again, but if it doesn't end up being a successful maneuver, where do you pivot from there? For the Mavericks in their first round series, a lot of guys stepped up defensively, but the shooting was pretty rough. Kyrie was the only guy to shoot above 40% from the outside. You did have a guy like Derrick Jones Jr. shooting 38.5%, which is pretty good, but other guys like PJ Washington, who has really not hit his threes a lot since he became a Dallas Maverick, shot just 31% from the three. Josh Green shot just 25%, Luka shot 24%. A guy like Dante Exum didn't hit a single three the entire series. The Mavs have to shoot a lot better and will be playing a much tougher defense again that has a lot more athleticism and speed on the perimeter to go ahead and contest those shots, run them off of those spots. You've got to make the looks that you get really count. And one way they can do that is Oklahoma City gives up a ton of good looks in the corner. They're going to rotate over, especially if you go ahead and get inside with some size. You're going to find a lot of really wide open shooters in those corners. If you can hit those corner threes, things can really start to snowball and you can give the Thunder some problems. But if you're missing those good looks, you're not going to get a lot of other uncontested ones against this Thunder defense. My final key to the matchup is, can the Mavericks punish the Thunder for their lack of height? This is something that's been well noted, that the Thunder are a much smaller team than a lot of other squads in the field. I remember a lot of people saying that, oh, maybe the Thunder could have problems against the Pelicans because a guy like Jonas Valanciunas is this big, bruising big who can give them some issues. And he did put up some decent numbers, but he also became quickly unplayable because he's slow-footed on the perimeter. On defense, he was getting blown by with Chet. If there was a switch, he couldn't get out to the player. We were knocking down threes. Just couldn't really do much. Now, for the Mavericks, Lively and Gafford are likely going to be much more effective. They're much quicker. They've got a lot of length. They aren't as slow-footed as a guy like Jonas Valanciunas is. But at the same time, they aren't these big bruising offensive threats that JV was, and because neither of them shoot, they're just going to allow Chet to go ahead and camp down low instead of having to chase out there on the perimeter, allowing him to be the amazing rim protector and shot alterer that he is, and also allowing him to conserve more energy on that end because he's not getting back down continuously in the post. I'm curious to see if the Mavericks try to go small, because Jason Kidd alluded to them potentially doing that at points in this series in an interview earlier today. He talked about guys like PJ Washington, who could potentially play a small ball five, although he also mentioned playing like Markieff Morris at that spot. Really hope we don't see minutes with him in this series. I think that's a big problem if he ever has to show up. But even if you do go small ball, you increase your spacing, you've also then got a problem because you have no real rim protector in against a guy like Shai, who is one of the most prolific downhill attackers in the entire league, as well as a guy like Jalen Williams. This Thunder team drives a ton. You can't really afford to go super small ball against them, so the bigs are going to have to do what they can do. I think there's a little bit of a balance. And at the same time, while there are some concerns with playing some of those bigs against the Thunder, them as lob threats is also a big advantage to the Mavericks, because it's hard to go ahead and stop those guys from rim running when the Thunder don't have a lot of height. And if they can go ahead and dominate the offensive glass, getting Luka and Kyrie more and more touches, it can become a problem like the Thunder. They have to really lock in on that offensive glass, exploit that weakness for OKC, and the Thunder, meanwhile, are really going to have to fight for those boards, like we saw a number of times in the later games of that Pelican series. To sum it all up, I think this is going to be a really fun matchup. There's so many ways these two teams can attack each other, so many adjustments they can make. I think it's going to be a real chess match between the two coaches. Both teams have shown a ton on both ends. There's incredibly bright young stars. That battle between Luka and Shai in particular is going to be amazing to watch. And again, I think both teams have a lot to prove. People feel pretty split on this one. I've seen a lot of people say that the Mavericks are just going to overwhelm the Thunder. I've seen people say the Thunder are the better overall team. They're going to go ahead and get this W. You could really go either way. If you pick one side or the other, I'm not going to blame you. For me personally, though, I'm going to go ahead and take the Oklahoma City Thunder to win this series in 6 games. I've been between 6 or 7. I think I'm going to stick with 6, mainly because I think I picked 7 for a number of those first-round matchups, and we only saw one Game 7, so maybe I'm going too crazy. We're going to go Thunder in 6. I'm sure all the comments are immediately saying that I'm biased, but I think there are reasons to think the Thunder can pull this off. Don't get me wrong, Dallas is a major problem, but I do think the Maxi Kleber loss hurts them quite a bit, losing that stretch big who's mobile, who played some massive minutes for them in that Clippers series. That's a big deal. Also, Luka not seeming like himself and having that lingering injury issue, going into a much tougher defensive matchup isn't the best sign. Like I said earlier, he can bounce back, and Kyrie is a big X factor. If he starts going crazy like he did against Los Angeles, there are massive problems for the Thunder, but I think OKC has a lot more options they can throw at those guys in terms of their length, their athleticism, just overall better defenders. There's not that many answers on the Clippers, especially when compared to this OKC team. The Thunder held the Pelicans to just 93.5 points per 100 possessions in the first round, which, again, I know they didn't have Zion, but that's the lowest mark by any playoff team in a series in the last 8 years. That defense is for real. For the Thunder, I think a lot of this comes down to Shai and Jalen Williams having big series. Shai is no longer going to be facing a guy like Herb, who, again, is probably the best defender I've ever seen guard Shai, so I'm expecting a big series. And Jalen Williams has been very rarely ever slowed down by anything. You've also got better overall health for the Thunder at this point. I think that is something that we have to think about with the Maxi Kleber injury and Luka being banged up, which also leads to better overall depth for Oklahoma City, a lot of weapons, more firepower potentially they can throw at Dallas, in addition to having home court and the coaching advantage, as well as a rest advantage. They haven't played in about a week at this point, which maybe leads to them coming out slow, but against a team that is really beat up and had a physical 6-game series against the Clippers, I think that is something we have to take into account as well. Once again, if you're picking the Mavericks, I really don't blame you. Luka is a hard player to go ahead and bet against if he returns anything to his usual efficiency. It's a big problem for OKC. If they're able to control that offensive glass, get more opportunities, and slow down Shai and Jalen Williams, that's a pretty good recipe to slowing the Thunder down completely. But just overall at this moment, I think the Thunder are the healthier and more well-rounded team. So I'm going to go ahead and take them to win this one. And again, I was between 6 and 7 games. I think we'll go with 6 games. Going ahead and getting the job done in Dallas to move on to their first conference final since 2016. With all that being said, that's my breakdown of this series. Let me know down below in the comments who you have winning, how many games, and what are some other key points that you're taking into account when trying to evaluate this. I appreciate you all watching. Leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on future videos. And also comment down below some eliminated teams that you want me to talk about in a full video, because when we're in between games or say there's nothing I want to talk about specifically from a game on a day, I want to make some videos going ahead and breaking down teams' upcoming off seasons. There's a lot of interesting squads, so leave some of those teams that you want to see down below in the comments as well. And for the moment, I appreciate you all watching. I'll see y'all later. Real one, say it back.